The doorbell rang at exactly 7:30, just as my kids were finishing their homework. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw a woman with graying hair, clutching a faded purse and looking around nervously. It took me a full 10 seconds to recognize her. My mother. The woman who hadn't spoken to me in 15 years. She looked older, thinner, with worry lines etched deep around her eyes. Her clothes were wrinkled, like she'd been sleeping in them. When I opened the door, she attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hello, Zoe," she said softly. "I know this is unexpected, but I didn't know where else to turn." Behind me, I could hear my children laughing at something on television. The sound of their happiness felt like a shield between us. I remembered the last time I'd seen her, when she'd chosen her boyfriend over her own daughter, and left me at a group home. "What do you want, Mom?" I asked, not moving from the doorway. Her smile faltered. "I need help, honey. I've got nowhere else to go." I studied her face, searching for any sign of the woman who'd raised me for 13 years before abandoning me completely. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted her purse strap. I noticed her wedding ring was gone. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Just for a few minutes?" Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. She walked into my living room, taking in everything with wide eyes. My kids looked up from their homework spread across the coffee table. "Mom, who is this?" asked my eldest, Ezra, who was 12. "This is your grandmother," I said carefully. "Kids, go finish your homework upstairs." They gathered their books without complaint, sensing the tension. My mother watched them go with something that looked like regret. "They're beautiful, Zoe. They look just like you did at that age." I crossed my arms. "What happened, Mom? Where's Frank?" Frank was the boyfriend she'd chosen over me all those years ago. Her face crumpled slightly. "He died 6 months ago. Heart attack. And without his income." She trailed off, looking around my comfortable home again. "I heard you were doing well for yourself." I led her to the kitchen, away from where the kids might overhear. She sat at my dining table like she belonged there, which irritated me more than I wanted to admit. "How did you find me?" I asked, pouring myself coffee but not offering her any. "Your cousin Beth mentioned you on social media. Said you started your own business, had kids. I looked you up online." She paused. "I'm proud of you, honey. I always knew you'd make something of yourself." That stung. "No, you didn't. You thought I was a problem that needed solving. That's why you dumped me at Riverside Group Home when I was 13. She flinched. "That's not how it happened, and you know it. You were acting out, getting into trouble. I thought some structure would help." "Structure?" I laughed bitterly. "You left me there for 3 years, Mom. 3 years without a single visit or phone call." She looked down at her hands. "Frank said it was for the best. He said if I kept running back to you, you'd never learn to be independent." There it was. Even now, she was blaming him instead of taking responsibility. My name is Zoe Williams, and I learned to survive the hard way. When my mother dropped me off at Riverside Group Home, she told me it was temporary, just until I straightened up my act. I was 13 years old, and had committed the terrible crime of not liking her boyfriend. Frank moved in with us when I was 11. He didn't want kids around, said they cramped his style. Mom started finding fault with everything I did. My music was too loud. My friends were bad influences. I stayed out too late, even when I was home by 8. The final straw came when I refused to call Frank Dad. He told Mom it was him or me. She chose him. "This is just temporary," she said as we pulled up to the group home. "Just until you learn some respect." I begged her not to leave me there. I promised I'd be better, quieter, invisible if she wanted. But she drove away without looking back, and I understood that I was completely alone in the world. That night, lying in a strange bed surrounded by other unwanted kids, I made a promise to myself. I would never depend on anyone again. The group home taught me things school never could. I learned to fight for my food, to hide anything valuable, and to never show weakness. I learned that adults lie, and that promises mean nothing. But I also learned determination. I studied harder than anyone else because education was my way out. I worked part-time jobs as soon as I was old enough, saving every penny. When I aged out of the system at 16, I had enough money for a security deposit on a tiny apartment. I finished high school while working full-time at a grocery store. College seemed impossible until I qualified for financial aid. I studied business during the day and worked at night, sleeping 4 hours if I was lucky. At 19, I met Danny. He was charming and told me I was beautiful. When I got pregnant with Ezra, he promised we'd be a family. He left when Ezra was 6 months old. Kieran came next, then Leo. Different fathers, same story. They all promised to stay and then disappeared when things got real. By 25, I was a single mother of 3 boys, but I was also determined to give them the stability I'd never had. Now I'm 31 and own a successful marketing consultancy. I specialize in helping small businesses build their online presence. It started as freelance work done during my kids' nap times and grew into something I never imagined possible. My house is everything I dreamed of as a child. For bedrooms, a big backyard, a kitchen where my boys can do homework while I cook dinner. We have family movie nights and birthday parties and all the normal things I'd never experienced. I built this life from nothing, with no help from anyone. Every client, every contract, every success was earned through late nights and careful planning. My kids would never know what it felt like to be unwanted. And now here sat my mother, in the kitchen of the home she'd never seen, asking for help from the daughter she'd abandoned. I lost the house, she said quietly. Frank didn't have life insurance and there were debts I didn't know about. The bank foreclosed last month. I felt a flicker of sympathy before I remembered how she'd left me with nothing. What about your sister? Your friends? She shook her head. Karen won't return my calls. And my friends, they were really Frank's friends. Against my better judgment, I made her coffee. Old habits die hard, and my mother had raised me to be polite before she'd abandoned me. Where have you been staying? I asked. A motel for the past 2 weeks. But my money's running out. She wrapped her hands around the mug like it was a lifeline. I know I have no right to ask, but I need help, Zoe. Just until I can get back on my feet. I watched her carefully. The mother I remembered had been confident, always put together. This woman seemed broken, desperate. Part of me felt satisfied seeing her brought low. Part of me felt guilty for that satisfaction. What kind of help? I asked. Just a place to stay. I could help with the kids, earn my keep. I know I made mistakes when you were young, but I want to make things right. Mistakes? The word came out sharper than I intended. You didn't make mistakes, Mom. You made choices. You chose Frank over your daughter, and you lived with that choice for 15 years. She started to cry, which made me uncomfortable. The mother I knew never cried, never showed weakness. I know, she whispered. I know I failed you, but I'm trying to do better. That night, after she'd gone back to her motel, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the woman who'd raised me for 13 years versus the stranger who'd sat in my kitchen. My kids asked questions at breakfast. Ezra wanted to know why they'd never met their grandmother. Kieran asked if she was coming back. Leo, my youngest at 7, just wanted to know if she liked video games. I'd worked hard to build a stable life for them. We had routines, traditions, security. The thought of disrupting that made me anxious. But I also couldn't ignore the fact that my mother seemed genuinely desperate. I called my cousin Beth, the one who'd apparently been talking about me online. Oh my God, Zoe, she said when I told her about the visit. I can't believe she actually showed up. She's been asking about you for months. Months. Ever since Frank died. She tried to get your number from me, but I told her I didn't have it. Beth paused. She's been staying with different people, wearing out her welcome. Last I heard, she was almost broke. This painted a different picture than the one my mother had given me. She hadn't just lost her house, she'd been bouncing around using people. The next evening, she showed up again. This time she brought flowers from the grocery store and a bag of cheap candy for the kids. Ezra politely thanked her but stayed close to me. Kieran hid behind the couch. Leo, always the friendly one, showed her his Pokemon cards. I've been thinking about your offer, I said after the kids went to bed. Her eyes lit up with hope. And you can stay in the guest room. Temporarily. But we need to set some ground rules. She nodded eagerly. Of course, anything. First, this is my house and my family. You follow my rules when it comes to the kids. Second, you help with household expenses as soon as you're able. Third, you actively look for work and your own place. This isn't permanent. I understand completely, she said. Thank you, Zoe. You don't know how much this means to me. But as I watched her smile, something felt off. It was too bright, too grateful. It reminded me of the fake smile she'd worn when Frank was around. The one that said she was getting what she wanted. I pushed the feeling aside. Maybe I was being paranoid. The first week went surprisingly well. Mom helped with laundry and cooking. She was patient with the kids and didn't try to overstep her boundaries. She even found a part-time job at a local diner, just like I'd had to do at her age. But small things started bothering me. She asked a lot of questions about my business. How many clients did I have? How did I handle payments? What kind of contracts did I use? I'm just interested, she said when I asked why she wanted to know. I'm proud of what you've accomplished. Maybe I could help somehow, with my experience. Her experience was 20 years of being a housewife to Frank, who'd controlled every aspect of their finances. I couldn't see how that qualified her to help with my business. I also noticed she spent a lot of time on her phone, having quiet conversations in her room. When I asked about it, she said she was trying to get in touch with old friends, looking for better job opportunities. The kids were adjusting to having her around. Ezra remained polite but distant. Kieran warmed up to her gradually. Leo loved having another adult who would play games with him. 3 weeks in, I found her looking through papers on my desk. She claimed she was just looking for a pen, but my laptop was open to my client database. Mom, those are confidential files, I said, closing the laptop. I wasn't reading anything, she said quickly. I just needed to write down a phone number and saw the pen next to your computer. It was plausible, but something in her tone bothered me. I started being more careful about leaving work materials out in the open. The next incident happened a few days later. I caught her in my bedroom, supposedly looking for the vacuum cleaner that was clearly stored in the hall closet. I thought I heard you say you kept it in here, she said, but I'd never told her anything about where I kept cleaning supplies. I started to wonder if letting her stay was a mistake. But she was family, and she seemed to be trying. The kids were getting used to having her around, and I didn't want to disrupt their lives unnecessarily. I decided to be more vigilant instead of confrontational. A month after she moved in, I noticed changes in her behavior. She seemed more confident, less grateful. She started making comments about my parenting and suggesting improvements to my business. You could probably charge more for your services, she said one evening. And have you considered hiring employees? You're doing all the work yourself. I'd been running my business successfully for 6 years without her input. Her sudden expertise irritated me. I like keeping things small and manageable, I said. But think of the growth potential. You could expand, maybe get an office space. What she didn't understand was that I'd chosen to keep my business small specifically, so I could be present for my kids. I'd seen what happened when parents prioritized money over family. She also started talking to the neighbors, introducing herself as my business partner. When Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned it to me, I was confused. Your mother said she's helping you expand your marketing company, she said. How exciting. I'd never told my mother she could represent herself that way. And we'd certainly never discussed her involvement in my business beyond her expressing casual interest. The breaking point came 6 weeks after she'd moved in. I returned from a client meeting to find her in my home office, sitting at my computer. The screen showed my business banking information. What are you doing? I demanded. She jumped, startled. I was just... You got an email notification and I thought it might be important. So you decided to log into my banking account? I saw your password written down, she said defensively. I thought there might be a payment issue. I'd never written down any passwords, and my banking required 2-factor authentication on my phone. She couldn't have accessed it without considerable effort. Get out of my office, I said calmly. Zoe, you're overreacting. I was trying to help. Get out. After she left, I changed all my passwords and enabled additional security measures. I also called my bank to alert them about potential fraud concerns. That night, I lay awake thinking about patterns. The questions about my business. The lies about where she'd been in the house. The conversation with neighbors. The attempted access to my banking. My mother wasn't just staying with me. She was studying me. I decided to test my suspicions. I created a fake email account and sent myself a message about a supposed large payment coming in from a new client. I left the email open on my computer and told my mother I was running to the grocery store. When I returned 20 minutes later, the email had been forwarded to an address I didn't recognize. I now had proof that she was monitoring my business communications, but I didn't know why or what she planned to do with the information. I spent the evening researching identity theft and business fraud. What I learned made my stomach turn. With access to my computer and personal information, she could potentially open accounts in my name, forge contracts, or redirect client payments. But why? She had a place to stay and was earning money from her part-time job. What more could she want? The next morning, I called my accountant and asked him to flag my accounts for any unusual activity. I also made an appointment with a lawyer who specialized in fraud protection. It sounds like you're dealing with a potential case of familial fraud, the lawyer told me. It's more common than people think, and it's often the hardest to prosecute because victims hesitate to take action against family members. I decided to monitor my mother's activities more closely. I installed security cameras in common areas of the house, disguised as a home security upgrade. I also started keeping detailed records of her behavior and statements. What I discovered was disturbing. When I wasn't home, she spent hours on my computer. She'd even figured out how to access my deleted browser history. She was researching my clients, my business bank accounts, and my personal finances. She was also making phone calls to someone, always when she thought I was asleep or out of the house. From what I could hear through the walls, she was discussing opportunities and timelines. The most damning evidence came from a conversation I overheard when I came home early from a client meeting. She was on the phone in her room, speaking in low tones. She's completely trusting, I heard her say. Keeps everything on her computer. I could have access to everything within a week. My blood ran cold. The mother who'd abandoned me was now planning to rob me. But I needed more concrete evidence before I could take action. I couldn't risk being wrong and traumatizing my children by throwing out their grandmother based on suspicions. I began setting traps. I left fake documents on my desk detailing fictional business deals and contracts. Within days, she'd photographed them with her phone. I created fake email accounts and sent myself messages about large sums of money coming in from clients. She forwarded every single one. The most elaborate trap involved creating a fake business proposal that mentioned keeping large amounts of cash in my home safe. I left the document open on my laptop and pretended to take a long phone call outside. When I returned, she was in the kitchen making coffee, acting completely normal. But the timestamp on my computer showed the document had been accessed while I was outside. That night, I heard her talking on the phone again, this time mentioning a safe and cash reserves. She was definitely sharing information about my fake business dealings with someone else. I realized she wasn't working alone. Someone was coaching her, helping her plan whatever they intended to do to me. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. This wasn't just about money. My mother was actively plotting against me with accomplices, putting my children and our home at risk. I made the decision to gather enough evidence to ensure criminal charges would stick. The final trap was the most important one. I created fake bank statements showing a large cash deposit from a fictional client, then left them in a folder marked deposit receipts on my desk. I also told her I'd be out of town for a client presentation the following week, leaving the kids with my neighbor overnight. This was a lie, but I wanted to see what she'd do if she thought she had the house to herself. As expected, she took photos of the fake bank statements. She also made several phone calls that night, discussing next week and when she's gone. I'd heard enough to know that whatever they were planning would happen while I was supposedly out of town. I called the police and explained the situation. The officer I spoke with was sympathetic, but explained that they couldn't arrest someone for taking photos or making suspicious phone calls. We need evidence of an actual crime, he said. But if you believe she's planning to steal from you, We can advise you on how to protect yourself and gather evidence. I followed their advice and installed additional hidden cameras throughout the house. I also moved anything truly valuable to a safety deposit box at my bank. Then I waited. The day of my supposed business trip, I dropped the kids off at my neighbor's house as planned. But instead of leaving town, I parked around the corner and waited. At 8 o'clock that evening, a man I'd never seen before knocked on my front door. My mother let him in immediately. Through my hidden cameras, I watched them embrace like old friends. "Is she really gone?" he asked. "Flew out this morning," my mother replied. "We have all night." They went straight to my home office. The man had brought tools. Lockpicks, a small crowbar, and what looked like computer equipment. My mother directed him to my desk and filing cabinets. I called the police from my car, watching the live camera feed on my phone as they searched through my home. "They're in my house right now," I told the dispatcher. "I have video evidence of them breaking into my safe and going through my files." The police arrived within 10 minutes. I met them at the corner and gave them my house key, explaining that I had permission to be there, but the two people inside did not. When the officers entered, they found my mother and her accomplice in the process of trying to open my actual safe, having realized the cash deposits were fake. The man turned out to be Frank's brother, Gary. After Frank died, Gary had convinced my mother that I owed her support since she'd sacrificed everything to raise me. "She's living in a mansion while her mother stays in motels," Gary had told her. "You deserve half of everything she has." They'd planned to steal my client database and bank information, then gradually drain my accounts over several months. Gary had experience with financial fraud and had assured her they wouldn't get caught. "I raised her," my mother told the police officers. "I have a right to benefit from her success." "Ma'am, she was a minor when you abandoned her," one officer replied. "You have no legal rights to her property or finances." The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd left me with nothing now believed she deserved half of everything I'd built. They were both arrested for breaking and entering, attempted theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The evidence from my hidden cameras was clear and undeniable. As they put her in handcuffs, my mother looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, pure hatred. "You ungrateful little bitch," she snarled. "After everything I did for you." The house felt different after they were gone. The kids asked questions, but I kept my explanations simple. Grandma had made some bad choices and wouldn't be staying with us anymore. Ezra, who'd always been perceptive, seemed relieved. "I didn't like how she looked at our stuff," he said. "Like she was counting it." Kieran was confused but accepted that sometimes adults make mistakes. Leo was sad because he genuinely liked having her around, even though he didn't understand what had happened. I spent the next few days removing all traces of her presence from our home. I changed the locks, updated all my security systems, and had my accountant do a thorough review of all my business and personal accounts. Fortunately, she hadn't managed to actually steal anything. The fake information she'd shared with Gary had led them to waste time looking for money that didn't exist in places it wasn't kept. But the emotional damage was real. I'd allowed myself to hope, briefly, that my mother had changed, that she genuinely wanted to rebuild our relationship. Instead, I'd learned that she was exactly the same person who'd abandoned me 20 years ago. Someone who put her own needs above everything else, including her family's safety. The trial was scheduled for 3 months later. In the meantime, I focused on healing and moving forward with my children. I enrolled in therapy to process the complex emotions around my mother's betrayal. The counselor helped me understand that my reaction was normal, and that protecting my children had been the right choice. My business continued to grow. Word had gotten out about my situation, and several potential clients reached out specifically because they admired how I'd handled the fraud attempt. They wanted to work with someone who was smart and prepared. I used the experience to develop a new service offering, helping small business owners protect themselves from financial fraud and identity theft. It became one of my most popular packages. The kids adapted well to our routine, returning to normal. We had family dinners without the tension of wondering what my mother was really doing. Ezra started bringing friends over again, something he'd stopped doing while she was staying with us. I realized that having her in our home had created an undercurrent of stress that I'd tried to ignore. Without that stress, our family dynamic improved dramatically. At the trial, my mother's lawyer tried to argue that she'd been manipulated by Gary, that she was grieving and vulnerable after Frank's death. They painted her as a victim who'd made poor choices under influence. But the evidence was overwhelming. The photos she'd taken, the information she'd shared, the weeks of planning, it all showed deliberate intent to commit fraud. The prosecutor presented a clear timeline of her actions, from the initial visit to the final attempt to access my safe. My hidden camera footage left no room for doubt about her motivations. This wasn't a moment of weakness, the prosecutor told the jury. This was a calculated, months-long effort to steal from her own daughter. Gary testified against her, trying to reduce his own sentence by claiming she'd been the mastermind. My mother's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. When she took the stand in her own defense, she finally showed her true colors. Instead of expressing remorse, she talked about how I owed her for the years she'd raised me. I gave her 13 years of my life, she said. I fed her, clothed her, put a roof over her head. She owes me for that. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. They found both my mother and Gary guilty on all charges. Gary received 18 months in prison for fraud and conspiracy. My mother received 12 months, with the possibility of parole after 8 months, due to her age and lack of prior criminal history. As the judge read the sentence, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. For 20 years, I'd wondered if I'd been wrong about my childhood, if maybe I really had been the problem. Now I knew the truth. My mother was exactly who I'd thought she was, someone who saw relationships as transactions and believed the world owed her something. The judge also ordered restitution for my security system upgrades and legal fees. It wasn't much money, but it was a symbolic acknowledgement that I'd been wronged. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter than I had in months. My children were waiting with my neighbor, who'd watched them during the trial. Is it over? Tyler asked. Yes, I said. It's over. 6 months later, I received a letter from prison. My mother had written to ask if I would visit her. I've had time to think about everything, the letter said. I know I made mistakes, but you're still my daughter. Don't you think family should forgive each other? I read the letter twice, then put it in my fireplace and watched it burn. Forgiveness didn't mean subjecting my children to someone who'd proven she couldn't be trusted. It didn't mean pretending that her choices hadn't had consequences. I'd learned to forgive my 13-year-old self for believing it was somehow my fault when she left me. I'd forgiven the teenager who'd thought she wasn't worth loving. I'd even forgiven the young adult who'd made poor relationship choices because she didn't know what healthy love looked like. But I didn't owe forgiveness to someone who'd never acknowledged the true impact of her actions. My children deserved better than that. They deserved the security of knowing that their mother would always protect them, even from family members who might hurt them. That was a lesson I'd learned too late in my own childhood, but one I could pass on to them. Today, my business is thriving beyond anything I imagined when I started it. We've expanded to offer comprehensive protection services for small business owners, and I've been featured in several industry publications as an expert on fraud prevention. My children are happy, healthy, and secure. Ezra is now 14 and wants to study cybersecurity when he gets to college. Kieran plays soccer and loves math. Leo has discovered a talent for art and fills our house with his colorful drawings. We've created new traditions to replace the complicated feelings around family. Every year on the anniversary of the day my mother left me at the group home, we have a celebration dinner. Not because I'm glad it happened, but because it led me to build something better. Sometimes I think about the mother I wished I'd had. Someone who would have fought for me, protected me, put my needs first. I can't change the past, but I can be that mother for my children. The guest room where my mother stayed is now Ezra's art studio. The space where she plotted against us has been transformed into something creative and positive. Last week, Leo asked if we'd ever see Grandma again. I told him that some people aren't able to be part of our family, but that doesn't make our family any less complete. We are enough just as we are.